Hey y'all, it's West Virginia History with Mrs. B, and I'm here with episode 5 where we're going to talk about abstracts and how to complete our abstract. The first thing you need to do is you need to go to wvssfair.com and download the abstract. I'm going to walk you through each of the blanks and how to answer each of those questions as you're writing on your abstract. I cannot stress this enough. You need to use Arial 11 narrow single space to fill in your abstract so that you maximize the space. It can only be 3 pages long, and so that helps you get as much space used up as possible. I always tell my students to also put like a double space between the paragraphs. So you're writing, single space, and then there's a space between the paragraphs. So now that you have your form downloaded, at the very top, it wants you to put your project title. So just put the name of your topic. If you have a subheading for your project title, you're going to put the title, then a colon, and then the subheading. For the divisions, that's, division 1 for elementary. So you'll use I, division 2 for middle school, which is II, or division 3 for high school, which is III. And that's capital I's. Your category is your discipline, like where you're headed. So it could be archaeology, or it could be not archaeology, anthropology, or it could be economics or U.S. history. You need to delineate that on the form, and then your type is either group or individual. So let's look at the questions that the abstract asks, and I'm going to walk you through your answers for each of those. So question 1 says, explain the purpose of your investigation and or the reasons why you chose to investigate this topic. Think of this as your introductory paragraph, like if you were writing an essay. And so your whole point of this is to lay out your purpose and what you hope to prove with your research. So you may want to throw in, a thesis statement here in this paragraph. I want you to spend time explaining why you think this topic is important, and it's important to make personal connections between you and the topic. You could be choosing something like the Inuit in Alaska, but if you find a way to connect it to yourself, it makes this beginning, which is going to be the first thing that the judges read, it's going to catch their attention, and they're going to see your passion by you making those connections from your topic to yourself and why you chose it. So that's really, really, really important, okay? You need to make sure that you're making connections between you. Also important to note, my students are going to be shocked that I say this, you can answer this in first person because it's about you and your process. So you can answer question number 1 in first person. So you can say I or we if it's a group project. So which is different than other history writing. So question number 2 wants you to list the essential questions or research questions that drove your investigation. These need to be things that you're like, that are so open and they're not open-ended that they're not easily Google. You can't look them up on Google. I was going to try to say Googleable, and that does not come out very easily. So you want to make sure they're very open-ended. So here, let me give you some examples. A bad example. What year did Christopher Columbus arrive in the Americas? Well, I can get that from a pretty simple Google search. Here's a good example. This is one that's not so easy to look up on Google. What were the long and short-term impacts of Christopher Columbus's arrival in the Americas in 1492? You could turn that into an essay. We want it to be open-ended, that it's not easy to look up on Google. You want to make sure in number 2 that you bullet your questions. Some of my students will do like one big question and then have sub questions under it. You also want to make sure they like go chronologically. So if you're asking, like essential questions and it's about different parts of a topic, you want to make sure they feel like they follow chronologically in order. So think about your questions. that they're like the picture frame and the glass which holds your research together. Your questions ground everything that you do. Okay, for number 3, the question asks, describe your research methods and the types of sources that you use as part of your investigation, and how did you obtain your information. If you heard me say in the last video, don't say I started with a Google search. This is the question you don't want to start with. I started with a Google search. This can be answered in first person as well. Here you're going to outline your process. The books that you read, the online resources you accessed, that you went to the library, that you did interviews, that maybe you conducted online surveys, and how you did that online survey and what you used. You want to talk about your process in trying to build an overarching comprehensive understanding of your topic. And you want to talk about here too, like the primary resources that you used and you found. You want to make sure that you talk about that you visited libraries, meaning plural, your school library, the county library, the West Virginia State Archives, that you used online libraries. You want to be able to explain that you did a lot more than just a simple Google search to find your information. So for number 4, the question says, are your sources of information valid, and explain how you validated those sources. So I suggest for this one that you explain at least 2 or 3 sources and how you validated those sources. And I recommend for this one, looking up the CRAP test, CRAAP test, and using that method or another method to validate your source and to make sure your source is accurate. Okay, so next is number 5. It is write a concise summary of your investigation. Describe your most important findings and explain why they're relevant. So for this is going to be like a meat of an essay. So I kind of tell my students, look at it as like a 5-paragraph essay. Your first paragraph should be an overall summary of your research. And then it wants you to give your most important findings. We'll do 3 paragraphs of each of your most important findings and like why each of those is important and relevant. And then your final paragraph, you're going to wrap up those findings and explain again why they're important to know and understand. This should be a good bit of your chunk of your writing. It should take up, like I said, 5 like solid paragraphs. And be clear. My first most important finding was, and then you explain it, and then why it is relevant. Just be very clear in your answer, where you're pulling from the questions. And then number 6, it says, describe any conclusions you were able to draw as your investigation, and how do these conclusions relate to your essential or research questions. Super easy way to do this is like go copy your questions from number 2, and you should paste them down in number 6 and then answer them in a paragraph. How I have my students do it is they do a bold of the question, a bold type of the question, and then they put the answer under it. So remember, abstracts can be no longer than 3 pages. So if you get real hyper, you're going to have to edit it down to 3 pages. Okay, so it's important. You can't go over. I can't encourage you enough. Do not write on your abstract like a handwritten abstract. You just can't get enough information. You want to type. You want to use Arial 11 narrow, and you want it to be taking up as wide a space on your abstract as possible. So you don't want to indent. You want to have the full space. And so you want it to be a full answer. The bibliography, you need to make sure that starts on a separate page, and make sure you're using the font, the Arial 11 narrow for your bibliography. And if you're using a method that requires your bibliography to be in alphabetical order, make sure you do that. So make sure you follow the formatting for your bibliography. Make sure you cite interviews. Make sure you cite primary sources. Make sure you're citing your survey results. Anything that you have as part of your evidence, you need to make sure you have a citation for it. If your project does not have at least, I would say, 8 to 10 really good citations, then you need to go back and find more information. And you need to make sure it's really good information. I find it really frustrating when I look at an abstract and it only has one source. And it's one source over and over and over again. That is not effective. Okay? You want to make sure that you're giving a full picture, a full range of information by choosing lots of sources to help paint a full picture of your research topic. So thanks for joining me on this episode where we talk about abstracts. Episode number 6 is next, and it's all about creating your display board.